The Voidborn fleet detected the Indomitable within minutes of its arrival. A swarm of 300 bioships changed course and headed toward the human vessel. They had destroyed thousands of Coalition ships. One more would make no difference, or so they thought. Captain Daehyun watched them come on the tactical display. His bridge crew worked quietly and efficiently around him. There was no panic, no fear. They had trained for this moment for years. Commander Ji-won stood at the weapon station, her fingers dancing across the controls as she prepared the Indomitable's arsenal. "Enemy fleet approaching maximum range," she reported. "Weapons are hot and ready." "Fire when ready, Commander," Daehyun said calmly. What happened next would be talked about for generations. The Indomitable's main guns opened fire. Rail cannons accelerated projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Each round carried more kinetic energy than a nuclear bomb. They crossed the distance to the Voidborn fleet in seconds. The first salvo hit like the fist of an angry god. 12 Voidborn ships simply ceased to exist. They didn't explode dramatically. They were there one moment and gone the next, converted to expanding clouds of superheated gas. The shots that missed kept going, punching through 3 or 4 more ships before finally losing momentum. The Voidborn adapted quickly. They scattered and began evasive maneuvers. But the Indomitable had more weapons. So many more weapons. Point defense lasers tracked the smaller Voidborn organisms that tried to swarm the ship. Hundreds of laser turrets fired simultaneously, creating a sphere of death around the Indomitable. Nothing could penetrate it. Voidborn creatures exploded by the thousands. Their bodies burned to ash before they could get close. Commander Ji-won launched missiles next. These weren't the simple rockets the Coalition used. Each missile had its own targeting computer, its own sensor suite, its own ability to think and adapt. They wove through space like a school of mechanical fish, dodging Voidborn defensive fire and finding weak points in the organic armor. Nuclear fire bloomed across the battlefield. Not the clean fusion bombs of Coalition doctrine, but dirty fission weapons designed for maximum radiation. The Voidborn ships withered under the assault, their organic hulls unable to handle the radioactive particles that tore through them at the molecular level. On the refugee ships, Captain Yoonji and her crew watched in stunned silence. The Indomitable fought alone against 300 enemies and was winning. Not just winning, but dominating. The human ship moved with purpose and precision, each shot calculated, each maneuver perfect. "How are they doing this?" her weapons officer whispered. Yoonji had no answer. The Coalition's best ships needed numerical superiority to fight the Voidborn. This single human vessel was turning the enemy fleet into scrap metal. Dr. Soman stood on the Indomitable's bridge, brought aboard during the rescue operations. She had studied the Voidborn for years, trying to find weaknesses. Now she watched humans exploit vulnerabilities she didn't even know existed. "Your weapons," she said to Captain Daehyun, "they're using specific radiation frequencies." "How did you know?" Daehyun glanced at her briefly. "We fought the Voidborn before. 50 years ago, they sent scouts to our territory. We killed them, studied them, learned everything about them. Then we went dark and spent 5 decades building ships that could kill them efficiently." "The Singapore incident," Soman breathed. "That's what you called it." Everyone thought humans were destroyed or had retreated into isolation. "We did retreat," Daehyun confirmed, "but not out of fear. We retreated to prepare. We knew the Voidborn would spread eventually. We knew the Coalition would face them eventually. So we got ready." Another wave of Voidborn ships approached, these ones larger and more heavily armored. The Indomitable adjusted its tactics without hesitation. Commander Ji-won deployed a new weapon that made Soman's blood run cold: antimatter warheads. The Coalition had banned antimatter weapons 300 years ago. They were too destructive, too dangerous, too final. When matter and antimatter met, they annihilated each other completely, releasing energy that dwarfed even nuclear fusion. The warheads detonated in the midst of the Voidborn fleet. White light filled the view screen, so bright the automatic filters barely dimmed it in time. When it faded, 50 Voidborn ships were simply gone, not destroyed, gone, erased from existence. The remaining Voidborn began to retreat. For the first time since their arrival in Coalition space, the swarm turned and ran. "Pursue," Daehyun ordered. Lieutenant Taehyun, recovered enough to stand, joined a group of rescued Coalition pilots in the observation deck. They watched human fighters chase down fleeing Voidborn vessels. The fighters moved with impossible speed and agility. their pilots pushing the craft to limits that would kill any normal person. How are they surviving those accelerations? Someone asked. A human technician working nearby overheard the question. Neural interfaces and genetic enhancements. Our pilots are connected directly to their ships. They think and the fighter responds. As for the G-forces, well, we've made some modifications to the human body over the years. The Coalition pilots stared at him in horror. Genetic modification was another thing banned by Coalition law. It was considered playing God, tampering with the sacred design of natural life. The human shrugged. You can judge us for it if you want. But those modifications are why we're alive and winning. On the bridge, long-range sensors detected something that made Commander Jiwon smile. Captain, I'm picking up the Voidborn command node. It's 3 light hours away, coordinating the fleets in this sector. Daehyun studied the data. The command node was a massive bioship, larger than a small moon. It was the brain of the local swarm, directing thousands of vessels across multiple star systems. Destroying it would throw the entire Voidborn operation into chaos. How fast can we reach it? He asked. At maximum slipstream speed. 40 minutes, the navigation officer replied. Then let's go hunting. The Indomitable vanished in a flash of twisted space-time, leaving the battlefield behind. The rescued Coalition ships could only watch in amazement as the human warship simply disappeared. Elder Wanshik sat in the refugee transport's common area, surrounded by people asking questions he couldn't answer. Where had the humans been? Why did they come back? What kind of technology were they using? He thought about the old prophecies again. The Silent Ones will speak with fire. That was exactly what had happened. Humanity had been silent for 50 years. Now they spoke, and their words were written in nuclear fire and antimatter annihilation. Deep in Voidborn-controlled space, the command node felt its ships dying. It had never experienced defeat before. The swarm had conquered hundreds of species across dozens of galaxies. Nothing had ever stood against them successfully. Now something was coming, something that killed with efficiency and purpose. The node tried to analyze the threat, to understand this new enemy. But it couldn't. Human tactics made no sense to the hive mind. They were too aggressive, too willing to sacrifice resources for tactical advantage, too adaptable. The Indomitable dropped out of slipstream directly on top of the command node. Daehyun didn't waste time with warnings or demands. He simply gave the order. Fire everything. The full arsenal of the Indomitable unleashed at once. Railguns, missiles, lasers, particle beams, and weapons that bent the laws of physics itself. The command node's shields lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then the firepower meant to fight entire fleets concentrated on a single target. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Dr. Soman watched the tactical display as hundreds of Voidborn ships across the sector suddenly went dark or began firing randomly at each other. Without the command node's coordination, they were just animals, confused and leaderless. It's over, she said quietly. Daehyun shook his head. No, Doctor. It's just beginning. This was one sector, one small piece of the swarm, but now they know we're here. Now they know humanity has returned. The real war starts now. Ambassador Minji stood in the massive hangar bay of the Indomitable, watching as thousands of refugees filed off the transport ships. Medical teams moved through the crowds, treating the wounded and comforting the traumatized. The sheer scale of the human vessel amazed her. This single ship could hold the entire population of a small city. A human officer approached her, a young woman with sharp eyes and efficient movements. Ambassador Minji? Captain Daehyun requests your presence on the bridge. Minji followed her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The Indomitable was not just a warship. It was a mobile fortress, a complete military installation that could operate independently for years. She passed barracks, medical facilities, manufacturing centers, and training rooms. Everything humanity needed to fight a long war was contained within this single vessel. The bridge was surprisingly quiet despite the dozens of crew members working at their stations. Captain Daehyun stood before the main view screen, studying tactical data. He turned as Minji approached, and she got her first good look at him. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40 standard years. His face carried the calm expression of someone who had seen combat many times and learned not to fear it. Ambassador, he greeted her with a slight nod. I'm glad you survived Sanctuary Station. Thanks to you, Minji replied. Captain, I need answers. Where has humanity been for 50 years? Why did you disappear? Daehyun gestured to a holographic display. It showed an image from 5 decades ago. A small human colony on the edge of known space. This was Singapore Station. It was our furthest outpost, home to 50,000 people. The Voidborn found it first. The image changed, showing the aftermath. The station was a twisted wreck, covered in the organic growth that marked Voidborn feeding sites. We lost everyone, but before they died, our people managed to kill several Voidborn scouts and capture their biological data. We studied that data and realized something terrible. The swarm was massive and it was spreading toward Coalition space. Another image appeared, this time showing a human military council. We had a choice. We could warn the Coalition and hope they would prepare in time, or we could go dark, cut all contact and use that time to build a military force capable of stopping the Voidborn. You chose to abandon us, Minji said, anger creeping into her voice. We chose to save you, Daehyun corrected. If we had warned you 50 years ago, what would the Coalition have done? Formed committees, debated ethics, argued about resource allocation. The Voidborn would have arrived before you were ready. He was right, and Minji hated that he was right. The Coalition was built on diplomacy and consensus. They were slow to act, careful to consider all viewpoints. It made them civilized. It also made them vulnerable. Admiral Hyunwoo was brought to the bridge next. The reptilian commander had survived Sanctuary Station, though he was badly wounded. Human doctors had patched him up with medical technology that worked far faster than anything the Coalition possessed. He looked at Daehyun with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Your weapons, Hyunwoo said without preamble. They violate every treaty the Coalition has signed. Antimatter warheads, genetic modification, weapons that target biological systems specifically. These things are banned for good reason. Daehyun met his gaze steadily. Your treaties mean nothing to the Voidborn. They don't care about your ethics or your rules. They only understand strength and death, so that's what we give them. A human marine entered the bridge, her armor still scorched from combat. This was Sergeant Minho, leader of the boarding teams. She saluted crisply. Sir, we've finished searching the Voidborn wreckage. Found some interesting intelligence on their fleet movements. Good work, Sergeant, Daehyun acknowledged. How did the new armor perform? Like a dream, sir. We breached their bioship, eliminated all resistance, and extracted data cores within 20 minutes. No casualties. Minji stared at the sergeant. You boarded a Voidborn ship? That's suicide. Their internal environments are toxic, filled with defensive organisms. Minho grinned. Not for us. Our armor is fully sealed with internal life support. And we've been genetically enhanced to resist most biological toxins. Plus, we use weapons that are very good at clearing organic matter quickly. She was describing things that would have caused outrage in Coalition space. Genetic tampering, biological weapons, aggressive boarding tactics that showed no regard for the sanctity of life. These were the actions of monsters, not civilized beings. But these monsters had saved them. Gunnery Chief Hyejin joined the discussion, called up to explain the weapon systems. She was enthusiastic about her work, like an artist discussing her craft. The point defense lasers can track and eliminate up to 10,000 targets simultaneously. We use predictive algorithms that calculate enemy movement patterns 3 seconds in advance. Combined with our targeting AI, nothing gets through. Targeting AI, Minji interrupted. You use artificial intelligence for weapon systems? That's been banned for 400 years. AI can't be trusted with kill decisions. Hyejin looked confused. Why not? Our AI is faster and more accurate than any biological operator. It doesn't get tired, doesn't get scared, doesn't hesitate. In combat, those advantages save lives. It also removes human judgment from killing, Admiral Hyunwoo said quietly. It makes war too easy. War is already easy for the Voidborn, Daehyun cut in. They kill without thought, without mercy. If we handicap ourselves with outdated ethics, we lose. It's that simple. Dr. Soman had been listening quietly from the side of the bridge. Now she spoke up. Captain Daehyun is correct from a purely practical standpoint. But Admiral Hyunwoo is also correct. The question isn't whether human methods work. Clearly they do. The question is what we become if we adopt those methods. You become survivors, Daehyun said flatly. You become the species that didn't go extinct. You can debate morality after the war is over. Right now, survival is what matters. The bridge fell silent. Minji looked around at the human crew working efficiently at their stations. They were calm, professional, and utterly deadly. They had turned warfare into a science, optimized and perfected over 50 years of preparation. She thought about the Coalition's way of fighting. They used shields more than weapons. They tried to disable rather than destroy. They showed mercy to defeated enemies. It was civilized and honorable, and it had gotten them nearly wiped out. "How many more ships do you have?" she asked Daehyun. 20 warships like the Indomitable are en route to this sector. Another 100 are spread across the galaxy, hunting void-born fleets. We have orbital shipyards producing more vessels every day. Within a year, we'll have 500 capital ships operational. The numbers were staggering. The entire Coalition fleet at its peak had numbered maybe 300 major vessels. Humanity was building a force that would dwarf anything the galaxy had ever seen. "What do you want in return?" Admiral Hyunwoo asked. "Humans don't strike me as the type to offer charity." Daehyun smiled, and it was the first time Minji saw any warmth in his expression. "We want what we've always wanted, Admiral. We want to live in peace, explore the galaxy, and not have to worry about extinction-level threats. But we've learned that peace requires the ability to fight. So we'll fight. We'll drive the Voidborn back to whatever dark corner of the universe they came from. Then we'll stand guard to make sure nothing like them ever threatens civilized life again." "And if the Coalition disagrees with your methods?" Minji pressed. "Then the Coalition can try to stop us," Daehyun said simply. "But I don't recommend it. You've seen what we can do to the Voidborn. We'd rather be your allies, but we'll do what we think is necessary regardless of your approval." It was a threat wrapped in an offer of friendship. Humanity was returning to galactic affairs, and they were returning as the dominant military power. The Coalition could accept that and benefit from human protection, or they could resist and face the consequences. Minji made her decision. "I'll recommend to the Coalition Council that we accept your alliance. We need your help, and arguing about ethics is a luxury we can't afford right now." Daehyun nodded. "Wise choice, Ambassador. Commander Jiwon, set course for the next Voidborn fleet position. Let's remind them that humanity doesn't forgive." Lieutenant Taehyun was dying slowly in the cold of space. His fighter had been hit 3 days ago during the battle at Sanctuary Station. The life support system was failing. The oxygen gauge showed less than 2 hours remaining. He had stopped trying to call for help yesterday when he realized no one was left to answer. The young pilot floated in his damaged cockpit, watching ice crystals form on the inside of his helmet. His squadron of 12 fighters had engaged a Voidborn cluster ship. He was the only one who made it out. Now he drifted through the debris field where a proud fleet once sailed, surrounded by the frozen bodies of people he had known. Taehyun checked his sensors out of habit more than hope. Most of them were dead, showing nothing but static. But one screen still flickered with life. It showed something strange. There were readings coming from deep space, from a direction where nothing should exist. Massive gravitational distortions. Something huge was moving out there, something that bent space itself. He laughed weakly. Probably just sensor ghosts, his dying mind seeing things that weren't there. But the readings grew stronger. Whatever it was getting closer. Far away, beyond the ruins of Sanctuary, a convoy of refugee ships limped through an asteroid field. Captain Yoonji commanded what was left of the evacuation fleet. 7 transport ships, each packed far beyond safe capacity. 30,000 survivors crammed into vessels meant for 10,000. They had been running for 3 days, trying to stay ahead of the Voidborn hunters. Yoonji was exhausted. She hadn't slept since the evacuation began. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the people she had to leave behind. The lottery system had been random, fair, and absolutely heartless. Families were split. Children lost parents. The lucky ones got to live with the guilt. "Captain, we have pursuit," her sensor officer reported. 3 Voidborn hunter ships. They'll catch us in 20 minutes. Yoonji looked at the tactical display and felt her stomach sink. The hunters were fast and deadly. Her transports were slow and defenseless. They wouldn't make it to the next jump point. This asteroid field would be their grave. "All ships, emergency scatter pattern," she ordered. Try to lose them in the asteroids. It was a desperate plan that wouldn't work. But it was all she had. In the cargo hold of the lead transport, Elder Wanchik sat among the refugees. The ancient Klixen was over 300 years old, his insectoid body bent with age. Everyone thought he had died when Sanctuary fell, but he had survived by hiding in an emergency pod. Now he sat quietly, listening to the fear around him. A young mother clutched her child, both of them crying softly. A soldier sat with his head in his hands, his uniform torn and bloody. Everywhere Warship looked, he saw hopelessness. The coalition had fallen. Their worlds were ash. Their fleets were destroyed. There was nowhere left to run. But Warship remembered something. An old story from before the coalition, from the days when his people first reached the stars. It was a prophecy that most dismissed as superstition. When all lights fade and darkness claims the galaxy, the sleepers will wake. Those who walked away will return. The silent ones will speak with fire. He had always wondered what it meant. Now, as death closed in, he thought he might finally understand. The ship shook violently as it scraped against an asteroid. Alarms blared. People screamed. The Voidborn were getting closer. Gyunji could see them on the view screen now, their organic hulls pulsing with that terrible light. They were hurting the convoy, pushing the ships into a dead end. "This is it," her first officer said quietly. "We have nowhere left to go." Yunji wanted to say something inspiring, something that would give her crew hope in their final moments. But no words came. She just gripped her command chair and waited for the end. Then space broke. Taehyun saw it first from his dying fighter. Reality simply tore open like fabric being ripped apart. The gravitational readings spiked so high they broke his remaining sensors. Light bent around something massive emerging from nowhere and everywhere at once. His oxygen-starved brain couldn't process what he was seeing. A ship came through the tear in space. No, ship was too small a word. It was a floating city. A mountain of metal and power, 5 kilometers long from bow to stern, bristling with weapons that looked like they could crack planets. It moved with impossible grace for something so massive, sliding out of the dimensional breach like a knife from a sheath. On the refugee ships, every sensor went crazy. The massive vessel appeared on their screens, blotting out the stars. It was broadcasting on all frequencies, the signal so powerful it overrode everything else. "This is the Terran Federation warship Indomitable. We received your distress call. We're here to help." Captain Yunji stared at the communication console in shock. "Terran, that's impossible. The humans disappeared 50 years ago. Everyone said they were gone. But there it was, undeniably real." The Indomitable moved between the refugee convoy and the Voidborn hunters. Smaller craft launched from its hangar bays. Sleek fighters that moved faster than anything Yunji had ever seen. They tore into the Voidborn ships with weapons that turned the hunters into clouds of organic debris in seconds. Elder Warship smiled for the first time in days. "The sleepers wake," he whispered. Lieutenant Taehyun watched a human fighter approach his dying vessel. It latched onto his cockpit with magnetic clamps. A voice came through his helmet radio speaking perfect standard Galactic with a strange accent. "Hold tight, pilot. We've got you." The fighter accelerated so fast Taehyun blacked out. When he woke, he was in a medical bay unlike anything he had ever seen. Human doctors worked on him with equipment that seemed decades ahead of coalition technology. A woman in a military uniform looked down at him with concerned eyes. "Rest easy," she said. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." "Home?" Taehyun croaked. "There is no home. The Voidborn destroyed everything." The woman smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had found prey. "Not everything. And we're going to make them pay for what they took." On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Daehyun stood before a tactical display showing the entire Andara sector. The Voidborn controlled everything. Their fleet spread across dozens of systems. It should have been hopeless. Against any other species it would have been. But humans didn't fight like other species. "Navigation, plot a course to Sanctuary Station," Daehyun ordered. "Communications, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we've made contact with Coalition survivors. Tell them it's time to come home." "Yes, sir." The officers responded in unison. Daehyun looked at the display showing thousands of Voidborn ships and felt no fear. Humanity had spent 50 years preparing for something exactly like this. They had built weapons the galaxy had never seen. They had learned to fight in ways that would horrify the civilized Coalition species. "Sound general quarters," he said calmly. "Charge all weapons. Let's show these things why humanity doesn't lose." All hope was lost until a human warship emerged from the Void Story outline, HFY Sci-Fi. Epic Part 1. The Fall of Sanctuary. Setting. The year is 2847. The Galactic Coalition, an alliance of 12 advanced alien species, faces extinction at the hands of the Voidborn swarm. a relentless hive mind species that consumes entire star systems. Main characters introduced Captain Daehyun, commander of the human warship. Indomitable Ambassador Minji, diplomatic liaison aboard the Coalition's last command station. Admiral Hyunwoo, leader of the Coalition's defense fleet reptilian saurid species. Dr. Somin, human xenobiologist studying the void-born commander Jiwon, human tactical officer aboard the indomitable key events. The Coalition's final stronghold, Sanctuary Station, orbits the last free world in the Andara sector. The void-born armada arrives with overwhelming force. Thousands of bioships. Admiral Hyunwoo's fleet of 200 ships engages but is quickly decimated. Coalition leaders debate evacuation versus last-stand civilian transports. Flee as the defense perimeter collapses. Desperate distress call is broadcast across all frequencies. Sanctuary Station's shields fail, and boarding begins. Ambassador Minji witnesses Coalition species abandoning hope, some choosing ritual suicide over capture. The last transmission ends. This is Sanctuary Station. We are overrun. May someone remember us. Part 2. Ghosts in the dark setting. Deep space, 72 hours after Sanctuary's fall. The Voidborn consolidate their conquest. Main characters introduced: Lieutenant Taehyun, young human pilot, sole survivor of a scout squadron, Elder Wonshik, ancient insectoid Klixen philosopher, presumed dead Captain Yoonji, commander of refugee convoy key events. Lieutenant Taehyun drifts in a damaged fighter, life support failing. He intercepts strange sensor readings, something massive moving through subspace. Flashback reveals humanity's mysterious disappearance from galactic affairs. 50 years ago, after the Singapore incident, the Coalition had written off humans as extinct or isolated. Refugee ships limp through debris fields. Pursued by voidborn hunters, Captain Yoonji's convoy is cornered in an asteroid field. Elder Wonshik, hiding among refugees, shares ancient prophecy about the sleepers who wake when all light fades. Voidborn bioships close in for the kill. Suddenly, spatial anomalies detected, massive gravitational distortions. Something is tearing through the fabric of space itself. Part 3. The Indomitable Setting. The shattered remains of the Andara sector. Multiple simultaneous viewpoints. Main characters focus. Captain Daehyun takes center stage. Commander Jiwon coordinates tactical response. Dr. Somin analyzes voidborn weaknesses, key events. Reality ruptures as the human warship Indomitable exits an experimental slipstream drive. The ship is colossal, 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapons the Coalition has never seen. Captain Daehyun broadcasts on all frequencies. This is the Terran Federation warship Indomitable. We received your distress call. We're here to help. Shock and disbelief among Coalition survivors. Humans were thought gone. Lieutenant Taehyun is rescued by human fighters using impossible acceleration. The Indomitable engages the Voidborn fleet with devastating effectiveness. Rail cannons firing at relativistic speeds shred bioships. Point defense lasers create impenetrable barriers. Nuclear-tipped missiles deployed with ruthless efficiency. Captain Daehyun reveals humanity has spent 50 years preparing for a threat like this. The Singapore incident was first contact with Voidborn scouts. Humanity went dark too. Build up military strength. Commander Jiwon demonstrates human tactical doctrine, aggressive, adaptable, and utterly unrelenting. Dr. Somin's research reveals Voidborn vulnerability to specific radiation frequencies. The Indomitable begins using experimental weapons designed specifically for hive mind species. Part 4. Humanity's doctrine. Setting aboard the Indomitable and across the battlefield. Main characters. Ambassador Minji brought aboard the Indomitable Admiral Hyunwoo, wounded but alive, witnesses human warfare. Captain Daehyun explains humanity's philosophy. Gunnery Chief Heejin, human weapons specialist. Sergeant Minho, leader of human marine boarding team's key events. Coalition survivors are evacuated to the Indomitable's massive hangar bays. Ambassador Minji meets Captain Daehyun, demanding answers about humanity's disappearance. Daehyun explains, "We didn't run. We prepared. We knew something like the Voidborn would come." Flashbacks show human military buildup, massive shipyards, weapons testing, genetic enhancement programs. Humanity developed technology specifically to counter hive minds and biological swarms. Admiral Hyunwoo is horrified by human weapons, antimatter warheads, reality-tearing missiles. AI-guided kill swarms. The Coalition fights with honor and restraint. Humans fight to win at any cost. Gunnery Chief Hyagin demonstrates human point defense systems destroying thousands of void-born organisms. Sergeant Minho leads Marines in boarding action against void-born hive-node ship. Humans use powered armor, neural interfaces, and bioweapons banned by Coalition treaties. A moral debate erupts. Are human methods justified if they work? Dr. Samin argues humanity learned from Earth's brutal history. Sometimes survival requires darkness. The Indomitable destroys the local Voidborn command node. The remaining swarm ships flee in disarray. The first Voidborn retreat ever witnessed part. The long road homesetting the aftermath. And the beginning of a counteroffensive main characters. All primary characters converge for resolution. Fleet Admiral Jeho, commander of the arriving human fleet, 20 warships. Counselor Yuna, human diplomatic envoy key events, the Indomitable is joined by an entire human battle fleet emerging from Slipstream. Fleet Admiral Jeho announces humanity's return to galactic affairs. The human fleet begins systematically hunting down Voidborn remnants in the Sector Coalition Council emergency session, convened aboard the Indomitable Ambassador Minji, presents evidence that humanity has liberated 17 systems in 3 weeks. The Coalition must decide: accept human help despite their brutal methods, or face extinction alone, Elder Warship speaks. Comparing humans to predators who learn to protect the herd, Counselor Yuna offers formal alliance. Humanity will lead the military campaign. Coalition will govern liberated worlds, Admiral Hyunwoo accepts. Recognizing that survival requires pragmatism, Captain Daehyun and Ambassador Minji develop mutual respect. Despite their differences, Dr. Soman shares all research with Coalition scientists. Cooperation begins. Lieutenant Taehyun joins a mixed human Coalition fighter squadron, first of many integrated units. The story ends with the combined fleet preparing to jump toward Sanctuary Station. Captain Daehyun's final speech. The Voidborn wanted to extinguish hope. They made one mistake: they let you call for help. And we humans, we never abandon our own. The fleet jumps to hyperspace, beginning the Liberation Campaign final scene. Sanctuary Station's ruins, where a single message beacon still broadcasts a human ship arrives and replaces the message. Sanctuary Station is under Terran Federation protection. All survivors return home. We've got you. Themes: hope and darkness. Even when all seems lost, unexpected saviors can emerge. The price of survival. Sometimes winning requires crossing moral lines. Unity through adversity. Former strangers become allies through shared struggle. Preparedness. Those who prepare for the worst survive when it comes humanity's duality. Capable of both terrible violence and selfless heroism, tone third-person narrative with military sci-fi elements, emphasizing human resilience, tactical superiority, and the classic HFY theme that humanity's capacity for warfare becomes the galaxy's salvation. Space rippled like water as 20 human warships emerged from Slipstream in perfect formation. The Indomitable was no longer alone. Each vessel was a masterpiece of military engineering, bristling with weapons and humming with power. Together, they represented more firepower than the entire Coalition had possessed at its peak. Fleet Admiral Jeho's face appeared on every view screen in the fleet. He was older than Captain Daehyun, his hair gray and his face lined with years of command experience. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of service. This is Fleet Admiral Jeho of the Terran Federation. To all Coalition survivors in this sector, hear me now. Humanity has returned. We received your distress call. We answered. From this moment forward, no species under our protection will face extinction alone. The Voidborn wanted to wipe you out. They made a mistake. They let you call for help, and we never abandon our own. The broadcast went out across dozens of systems, reaching every refugee ship, every hidden colony, every survivor who had thought themselves alone. Hope, which had died at Sanctuary Station, began to flicker back to life. On the Indomitable's bridge, Ambassador Minji watched the human fleet deploy with military precision. Each ship took up position in a formation designed for maximum coverage and overlapping fire zones. They moved like parts of a single organism, coordinated and efficient. The Coalition Council has agreed to an emergency session, she informed Captain Daehyun. They want to meet here aboard your ship. Daehyun raised an eyebrow. Not on neutral ground? They're willing to come to us? They don't have much choice, Minji said honestly. You saved us. You're the only ones actively fighting the Voidborn. If they want to have any say in what happens next, they need to work with you. 3 days later, the council assembled in the Indomitable's conference room. Representatives from 11 species sat around a large table, with humans seated at one end. Some of the counselors looked grateful. Others looked resentful. All of them looked exhausted. Admiral Hyunwoo spoke first. The human fleet has liberated 17 systems in the past 3 weeks. They've destroyed 4 Voidborn command nodes and thousands of bioships. Their effectiveness is undeniable. He paused, choosing his words carefully. However, their methods are troubling. They use banned weapons, ignore established rules of war, and show no mercy to defeated enemies. Counselor Yuna, the human diplomatic representative, responded calmly. The Voidborn aren't signatories to your treaties. They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They consume everything in their path. Fighting them with one hand tied behind your back is how you lose. Then we risk becoming like them, said a counselor from the aquatic Delaney species. Ruthless, merciless, what separates us from monsters if we adopt their methods? Elder Wanshik, now recovered and granted a seat at the council, spoke up. His ancient voice carried surprising strength. I have lived for 3 centuries. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched civilizations choose honor over survival and paid the price. The Voidborn do not care about our morality. They will kill us all, virtuous and corrupt alike. He turned to look at each counselor in turn. Humanity offers us a choice. Accept their protection and their methods or maintain our principles and face extinction. There is no third option. The universe does not reward the righteous. It rewards the strong. The room fell silent. Minji looked around at faces that had once governed the greatest alliance in galactic history. Now they were reduced to this. Survivors begging for help from a species they had considered equals at best and barbaric at worst. What do you want? Asked the council leader, a crystalline being whose species had been nearly wiped out. What is the price for your protection? Fleet Admiral Jeho leaned forward. We want a formal alliance. Humanity will lead the military campaign against the Voidborn. We will provide weapons, ships, and training. In return, the coalition will govern the liberated systems. You handle diplomacy, trade, and civil administration. We handle war. And after the war, someone asked, what happens when the Voidborn are defeated? Then we all work together to make sure nothing like them ever threatens us again. Counselor Yuna answered. We build a galaxy where our children don't have to fear extinction, where science and culture can flourish under the protection of sufficient military force. It was a vision of the future that the coalition had never imagined. They had always believed that peace came from understanding and cooperation, not from overwhelming military power. But the Voidborn had taught them a harsh lesson about the nature of the universe. Admiral Hyunwoo stood slowly. I have fought in 12 major battles. I have commanded fleets and led soldiers. I believed in the coalition way, in honor and restraint. But I watched Sanctuary Station fall. I watched good people die because we weren't willing to do what was necessary to survive. He looked at the human representatives. I vote to accept the alliance. One by one, the other counselors agreed. Some did so eagerly, others reluctantly. But in the end, the vote was unanimous. The coalition and humanity would stand together. Dr. Somin was transferred to a joint research facility established on one of the human warships. She worked alongside human scientists, sharing coalition knowledge of the Voidborn while learning about human weapons research. What she discovered both fascinated and horrified her. You've been studying them for 50 years, she said to her human counterpart. A brilliant researcher named Dr. Kyung-soo. You know more about the Voidborn than anyone in the coalition. Kyung-soo nodded. We had to. After Singapore Station fell, we collected every piece of biological data we could. We ran simulations, grew samples in labs, tested thousands of weapons to find what worked best. Some of our research violated every ethical guideline imaginable. But it worked, Somin said quietly. It worked, Kyung-soo confirmed. We created viruses designed to attack Voidborn nervous systems. Radiation frequencies that disrupt their cellular structure. Weapons that target the pheromones they use for communication. We turned our understanding of biology into instruments of death. Somin thought about her own research, years spent trying to understand the Voidborn in hopes of finding a peaceful solution. It seemed naive now. Some enemies couldn't be reasoned with. Some threats required absolute force. Lieutenant Taehyun found himself assigned to a mixed squadron, humans and coalition pilots training together. The cultural clash was immediate and obvious. Human pilots were aggressive, taking risks that made their coalition counterparts nervous. They pushed their fighters to the limit and sometimes beyond, but they were also willing to teach. A human pilot named Hana took Taehyun under her wing, showing him maneuvers that should have been impossible. "Your people fly defensively," she explained. "You try to survive. We fly to win. There's a difference." Over weeks of training, Taehyun began to understand. The coalition had been fighting not to lose. Humanity fought to win. It was a fundamental difference in philosophy that affected everything from tactics to weapon design. The joint fleet began its push toward Sanctuary Station. The Voidborn had fortified it heavily, turning the ruins into a command center for their operations in the sector. Reclaiming it would be both strategically important and symbolically powerful. The battle lasted 3 days. Human warships hammered Voidborn defenses with relentless firepower, while coalition vessels provided support and rescued survivors found in the wreckage. It was brutal and efficient. When it ended, Sanctuary Station was back in coalition hands. Captain Daehyun stood in the ruins of the command center where Ambassador Minji had made her last stand. The bodies had been cleared away, but the scars of that final battle remained. Minji stood beside him, looking at the place where she had thought she would die. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "When the Voidborn broke through, I thought it was the end of everything." "It was the end," Daehyun said. "The end of the old coalition. What comes next will be different, harder, but stronger." They walked to the communication center where a single message beacon still broadcast its desperate plea into the void. Minji reached out to shut it off, but Daehyun stopped her. "Leave it on," he said, "but change the message." Human technicians worked quickly, reprogramming the beacon. When they finished, a new message began broadcasting across all frequencies. "This is Sanctuary Station. We fell, we died, but we were not forgotten. The humans came. They heard our call. They answered with fire and steel. To all Voidborn listening, know this. Sanctuary Station is under Terran Federation protection. All survivors return home. We've got you. The galaxy fights back." The message would reach across light years, spreading hope to those who had given up and fear to those who thought themselves invincible. Months passed. The combined human coalition fleet pushed deeper into Voidborn territory, liberating system after system. It wasn't easy. The Voidborn fought with desperate ferocity, throwing everything they had at the advancing forces. But slowly, inevitably, they were pushed back. Elder Wanshik watched from the observation deck of the Indomitable as another Voidborn fleet fell to human weapons. He thought about the prophecy that had guided his people for centuries. The sleepers had awakened. The Silent Ones spoke with fire. The galaxy would never be the same,